Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing. Everything's fine? Great. All right, we left off last week looking at what changed between the first and second centuries with respect to the Christian church. And the most obvious change is that the Jewish element was missing in the second century. It was primarily a Gentile church going into the second century. And we had this quote here I shared, which is really a sad observation from a commentary, mainstream commentary. This author says this particular verse, I'm trying to remember if this was, let's see, when they were calling out, let his blood be upon us and our children. This particular verse, sad to say, has been used to justify Christian persecution of the Jews down through the centuries. Regarding Jesus as the incarnation of God, Christians of subsequent generations found it easy to think of Jews as guilty of deicide, that is, killing a deity. It is as shocking as it is true that anti-Semitism accordingly became a Christian virtue, indeed a Christian duty. Pretty shocking. I was sharing this because we had just gotten through the Nuremberg trial where Julius Streicher, this gentleman here, was on trial for war crimes. His anti-Semitic publications were blamed a lot for the hostility toward the Jewish people during the 1930s and 40s in Germany. He was tried, he was put on trial. At the witness stand, he was asked if there were any other anti-Semitic publications that existed in Germany that were, equally bad as far as portraying the Jewish people. And he said, yes, I have in my library a book by Martin Luther called On the Jew and Their Lies. I shared for a couple weeks a little bit from that. So we talked about how Streicher had used John 8 and saying that the Jews were the children of the devil. In fact, the passage, if you read it in context, as the Pharisees were being labeled as children of the devil. This is one of Streicher's writings. We know that the Jew, whether he is baptized as a Protestant or as a Catholic, remains a Jew. Why cannot you realize, you Protestant clergymen, you Catholic priests, you who have scales before your eyes, and serve the God of the Jews, who is not the God of love, but the God of hate? Why do you not listen to Christ, who said to the Jews, you are the children of the devil? So again, he's misquoting the passage. It's not the Jews who are the children of the devil. Jesus was referring to the Pharisees. So we talked about a little bit about how the Gentile church came in to be the prominent element within Christianity. The Jewish element was pretty well gone in the second century. These are some of the verses we covered last week, talking about the hope that would be brought to the Gentiles. And then I shared with you this video, and I think this is where we stopped. I want to play it one more time, because I was introducing you to the concept of supersessionism, also known as replacement theology, which is what you find going forward in the second century because of the Gentile dominance within the Christian church. So replacement theology teaches that Jews have been kicked out of their seat, that is within the plan of God, and it's now the Gentile church that sits in it, which is where we get the word supersessionism. To supersede something in this sense means to take somebody's place, to take somebody's seat. So I'm going to play this clip. Replacement theology is the theme of this man's book I had shared with you on When a Jew Rules the World. He is the actual author. So let's give this a shot, see if we get audio.
And then the other thing is we simply need to educate Christians on our own history. So in my book, When a Jew Rules the World, I've got a few chapters where I trace the history of the development of theological ideas in the church and I show how ideas lead to actions. So, and I call it the deadly logic of supersessionism, the deadly logic of replacement theology, and it's real simple. Once I say, is it Marcelo? Once I say, and forgive me using you as once I say God no longer likes Marcelo, God's mad at Marcelo. God's will is that Marcelo and his family are dispersed among the nations, that they're dissolved, they don't have a homeland anymore. That's God's feelings toward Marcelo. That's God's will for Marcelo, and I'm a servant of God. So the logic is, how should I treat Marcelo and his family? And so this became, in church history, you see it early, like in as early as the 1st century, you start seeing Gentiles introducing replacement theology, and then within a few generations, a few centuries, you see Christian theologians asking what they called it the Jewish question. How should we treat the Jews? Should we treat them with kindness and maybe they'll repent, or with harshness and maybe they'll repent? And so this became the Jewish question. It was a theological debate within the church, and it went on for hundreds of years. Well, eventually, Luther comes along, the Reformation, and he writes a book at the end of his life called On the Jews and Their Lies, and he says, I'm going to answer the Jewish question. He goes, here's the answer. Here's what we should do. And he lays out about 13 things, and he says things like this: burn their synagogues to the ground, cover over even the rocks that are left with dirt, do the same thing to their houses, because they commit the same abominations in their houses that they do in their synagogues. Drive them like screaming dogs from one city to the next. And you go, wait, this is Martin Luther, the father of the Reformation, said this about people, my people, your family. And we go, yeah, and then Hitler, and it's undeniable. And this comes from bad theology. And then Hitler comes along, who's not a Christian, but he builds upon the foundation that Christian theologians, that Martin Luther laid, and he says, I'm going to offer the final solution.
So he was mentioning that the early centuries of Christianity, there was this discussion about what to do with the Jews. I wanted to share with you some of these early church fathers, quote unquote fathers, but not my father. And I don't honor or respect what they say. All these gentlemen here, I'm going to share some of the quotes with Athanasius, Chrysostom, and Jerome. They're all saints within the Catholic realm. And just listen to what they have to say about the Jewish question. So this is Saint Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria. He taught that the Jews are worse than the demons, and that it is allowed to persecute them in cold blood because they have no future either on earth or in heaven. Saint Jerome, I'm going to put saint in air quotes here, Saint Jerome, who translated the Latin Vulgate, which is the text of the Catholic Bible for centuries and centuries. It was transmitted in Latin. The Vulgate would have been the de facto, kind of like what we consider the King James in English. The Latin Vulgate would have been the Catholic Bible for centuries and centuries. Anyway, Jerome translated the Vulgate, and he says of the Jews that they are two-legged, thistle-eating donkeys and animals to be slaughtered for hell. This is Saint Jerome. Saint John Chrysostom, who was the Patriarch of Constantinople. In the years 386 to 387, Chrysostom gave a series of 8 sermons in which he denounced Jews and Judaizing Christians, which have come to be titled, or at least his sermon collection has come to be titled, Against the Jews. And I'll share a few things here in these sermons that John Chrysostom, Saint Chrysostom, said. Certainly it is the time for me to show that demons dwell in the synagogues, not only in the place itself, but also in the souls of the Jews. Do you see that demons dwell in their souls and that these demons are more dangerous than the ones of old? Another prophet hinted at this when he said Israel is as obstinate and as stubborn heifer and still another called the Jews an untamed calf. Although such beasts are unfit for work, they are fit for killing, and this is what happened to the Jews. While they were making themselves unfit for work, they grew fit for slaughter. But the synagogue is not only a brothel and a theater, it is also a den of robbers and a lodging of wild beasts. And there's yet more. Christ said, it is no fair to take the children's bread and to cast it to the dogs. Christ was speaking to the Canaanite woman when he called the Jews children and the Gentiles dogs, but see how thereafter the order was changed about. They, the Jews, became dogs and we became the children. Certainly, it is the time for me to show that, I think this was a collection. Yeah, okay, so this is kind of a summary of what I've just finished reading. So these were church fathers in the mostly the 4th and 5th centuries, dealing with what to do with the Jewish people and how to treat them. Some will argue that these people, these saints, aren't anti-Semitic. What they're saying is not anti-Semitism. What they are expressing is anti-Judaism. You can be the judge. Anti-Judaism is opposition to the Jewish faith. Anti-Semitism is a hatred toward a people based upon race. The problem is we're getting into the point where they overlap because just about every Jew is going to be embracing Judaism.
Yes, Bill, I had a question for you because you're kind of an expert on this subject. Do you think that the separation of their God versus our God contributed to the Trinitarian movement of sorts, because they were trying to say that Christ, the form of Christ as being God, was different than the God that they worshipped as well? Do you think that was any sort of a catalyst? Because it's right around the same time period as the big debate with the Arians.
Yeah, I mean, even before the Trinity becomes a de facto concept within Christianity, you already had the anti-Semitism. Justin Martyr, who was living in the middle of the 2nd century, he was already writing against the Jews. I didn't include him in the quotes here. So, I mean, clearly the Jews had a distaste for what turned into the doctrine of the Trinity. I mean, they had reasons to reject Christianity because they didn't believe Jesus was the Messiah. But as time progressed and Jesus turned into a God, or one person of a three-person God, that didn't make things even any better. So it was already also a rocky relationship, and it just got worse over time. And Christians made it worse. I mean, as Martin Luther said, what Jew in their right mind would want to have anything to do with Christianity? So Christians have just made it almost impossible for a Jew to convert if it's a mainstream. The thing is, you will find Jews, there are Messianic Jews that do embrace the Trinity. It's kind of this perplexing thing, but it has such a root in Christianity. It's like even a Jew thinks that this is okay now, and that's another story as far as converted Jews to Christianity. Half of them will reject the Trinity, half of them will embrace it. It's a mess. So anyway, these are the saints of the Catholic Church writing on the Jewish question. So there's this little saying we try to teach our children. Sometimes we teach, I don't know, I don't have children, maybe you can tell me if you ever taught your kids this. If they run into bullies on the playground or at school in the neighborhood, and they parents try to alleviate the problem by saying, well, just remember, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt me. Which is, it's a way to cope with a bully. You can then overcome the bully, not by using force against the bully, but rather by ignoring their words. It might work on the local level, in your school or in your neighborhood, but when you get to the national level and the political level, words are often words will start wars, and words do indeed hurt. However, what we've been looking at, all this is anti-Semitic rhetoric from these church fathers. All this is contained within the world of theology, okay? This is going to get worse once something happens. When anti-Semitism leaps out of the theological realm into the political realm, then it becomes even more dangerous for the Jews. Now, how do we get from the theological to the political? Well, I'm going to introduce you to a gentleman by the name of Constantine. Constantine the Great. He lived from 272 to 337. And if you want to then see anti-Semitism on steroids, it begins with this gentleman. I'm going to show you a little video. It's about 4 minutes in length. Give you a little taste of Constantine and why he figures into this discussion. Just as a little bit of a background, he was a Roman general. He was stationed toward almost kind of like the British Isles, and he had the opportunity to take control of the entire Roman Empire. And when he was about to do that, something happened. And this video is going to, I think I have to cue it up, because I don't have it embedded. Whoop. I can find the right one. All right, got it. It's a 4-minute video.
When I was a kid, one of my favorite stories was about a hero who'd been addressed by God. My dad told me the story about a miracle that happened to the Roman general Constantine, right on this bridge in Rome. I'm a little kid in St. Mary's Church in Alexandria. Over the altar, the letters IHS. I say to my dad, "What's that?" He says, "In hoc signo vinces, Jimmy. In this sign you will conquer." And then he tells me this story. Constantine, a field right over here, has a vision in the sky. I guess that sky we're supposed to believe. At a time when the Roman Empire was still pagan, Constantine was the general in charge of the northern legions based in Germany. In the year 310, he set out with thousands of men to beat his rivals for control of the empire. Now Rome itself was in his grasp, right across this river.
I saw with my own eyes a cross of light in the heavens. It bore the inscription, "By this sign you will conquer." I described the marvel and its meaning to my men. I told them to reproduce it. A long spear crossed by a transverse bar forming the figure of a cross, to be carried at the head of all my armies.
They're carrying their spears and the sign of a cross, and he comes onto this bridge, meets the enemy, and against all the odds, wins. Constantine goes into Rome, declares himself emperor, and on the strength of that vision, he becomes a Christian.
In the midst of the imperial city is a trophy of victory and a safeguard of the Roman Empire. I ordered a statue of myself with a lofty spear and the figure of a cross to be placed by my hand, with this inscription: "By this sign I have conquered and liberated your city from the yoke of tyranny."
And what's the story? When does this date to? What year would they date this for?
Was made around 320 after
So-
Jesus Christ.
This is part of his glorification as
Yes.
the new emperor.
Yes.
Was it unusually big?
The biggest statue.
This is the biggest?
Yes, in Rome.
Really?
Yeah.
So we're all below, and we're all subservient.
Yeah.
Can you say what it meant that the emperor was a Christian.
Constantine had a political strategy to preserve the empire of Rome. After Constantine, was not possible to go back in pagan life.
Historians wonder whether Constantine's conversion was real, or was it just a way to strengthen his hold on power? These frescoes in an old Roman convent tell the story. The great emperor falls to his knees as he shares his crown with the Pope. This is the moment when the cross and the sword become one. Christianity turns violent. The things people do in the name of God. When Constantine converted, there were almost the same number of Christians and Jews. Today, there are around 2 billion Christians and only 15 million Jews.
So that's an introduction to Constantine the Great. The video mentioned that Constantine converted to Christianity. We need to clear up a few things here. First, Constantine was about 40 years old when he had this vision, what appeared to be a cross in the sky. Some say what he saw was actually a sword. If the story is true, I think I've got, yeah, I do. It's possible that it's true, what he saw was not just something made up. What he could have seen was what you have up here on the screen. I don't know if you've ever seen one. It's called a solar halo. Some call it a sun dog, S-U-N-D-O-G. And I came across a video online. I'm going to play this here. It's really fascinating.
Ja, dat is het stukje. En dan kan hij staan dan. Als we hem niet te voor zijn, ja, dat is toch maar goed. Ja, dat is het wat ik
So, it's a natural phenomenon. Has anyone seen one? Robert, you have? At night, too? A halo? All right. Well, you can see where something like this could be misconstrued as a cross. Whatever he saw, when they say he converted to Christianity, I want to make it very clear, he was 40 years old when he had this vision. He wasn't baptized until he was 65, and he was on his deathbed. Okay? Wrap your head around that. And in the interim, he participated in the Council of Nicaea, which is where a lot of times people will say we got the doctrine of the Trinity. He convened the council, ordered the bishops to show up, and made sure that they came out with one doctrine at the end of the day, and then ended up banishing all those who didn't agree to the creed that the bishops came up with. This was a man who was still worshiping the sun when he had convened this council, and there are coins you can find. I don't know if I've got, there we go. This coin, dated at 317, you've got Constantine on the left, and you have Sol Invictus, which is the sun god, on the right. And this is about the same time I'm trying to remember, I've got approximately 5 years after he had this vision, Constantine had this coin minted. On one side is a bust of Constantine, on the reverse side is the image of the sun god. And despite of all this, he is known as a saint within the Catholic Church. Okay. So you want to call it a conversion to Christianity? It's not my understanding of Christianity.
I have a question.
Sure.
So are you saying he didn't require everybody in the empire to be a Christian until his deathbed?
He wasn't baptized. Back then, baptism would have been, and today, I mean, that's how we understand it. You're in Christ when you decide to be baptized. He didn't undergo baptism until he was on his deathbed at age 65, 25 years after he saw his vision. Okay. What he did was favor Christianity and inject himself into the realm of theology. All along, he had not been baptized. So imagine someone coming off the street, with power, then telling us how to run our ecclesia, and then 25 years later, he decides to be baptized. I mean, that's kind of what we're looking at Constantine, an emperor, a general, who has this vision. He thinks it's related to Christianity. When he defeats his enemy, he then thanks the Christian God, who he attributes to this victory. He then showers the church with many blessings, makes them tax-free, builds churches, has copies of scriptures made, convenes councils deciding theological questions, but he hadn't even been baptized. And this is Saint Constantine. Rob?
It's very reminiscent of like the Nebuchadnezzar type of theology, where, your God is the true God, but I'm still going to continue doing what I'm doing.
Right, right. Very, very, very close. The only difference here is that Constantine, remember the context I'm trying to do this, is in the topic of anti-Semitism. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't an anti-Semite. Constantine was. So, let me...
Randy asked when?
When did he what?
When did he become anti-Semitic?
Very early on, and this is going to be what I'm going to talk about next here. I'll give you an example. Very early on, this is going to sound like I'm changing the subject. So, anyone know when Passover begins this year? April 12th, and it ends on April the 20th. Second question, does anyone know when Easter is in 2025? When? No, it's on the 20th, April 20th. Now, last year, Passover began on April the 22nd. When did Easter take place last year? It was an early Easter. It was March 31st. So how is this? This year, Easter is like 1 week after Passover. Last year, it was almost like a whole month before Passover. And isn't Easter supposed to represent when Jesus rose from the dead? And wasn't he crucified 3 days before he rose from the dead? And wasn't he crucified supposedly on Passover? So how is it you can have Easter and Passover 1 month here? We'll get back. Why do you have this mix-up? Why isn't it following the Jewish calendar? Why isn't Easter coinciding with Passover? Well, you can thank this gentleman right here, Constantine the Great. When he started to favor the Christian faith, he recognized something, that the Christians were worshiping dependent upon when the Jews celebrated Passover. So the Christians couldn't do anything until they figured out when was the Passover. And this was not something the Christians liked, that they had to be dependent upon dogs. You remember how they viewed the Jews. You're having to wait on a dog to tell you when to worship Easter or celebrate Easter. Well, Constantine gets involved in this matter, and he puts his foot down. And I'm going to share some words on this topic. This is Constantine deciding on what was going to happen with regards to Easter. Constantine, Augustus to the churches, thereupon, since a controversy had broken out on the subject of the most holy day of Easter, it was unanimously decided that it would be best for everyone everywhere to celebrate it on the same day. For what could be better for us and more reverent than that this festival, from which we have acquired our hope of immortality, should be observed invariably in every community on one system and declared principle. So this is summarizing what I was trying to highlight. There's a problem. The Christians are dependent upon the Jews, and when they determine Passover, and Passover is then determined upon, I guess, the moon. It's the beginning of a certain month, anyway. So you had to wait to figure out when the lunar month began. So Constantine continues, in the first place, it was decreed unworthy to observe the most sacred festival, Easter, in accordance with the practice of the Jews, having sullied their own hands with a heinous crime. Such blood-stained men are, as one might expect, mentally blind. It is possible now that their nation has been rejected by a truer system, which we have kept from the first day of the Passion to the present, to extend the performing of this observance into future periods also. Let there be nothing in common between you and the detestable mob of the Jews. And we'll stop there and just let that sink in. This is a Christian emperor, emperor favoring Christianity, making decisions for the empire in the name of the Christian church, and he says, let there be nothing in common between you and the detestable mob of Jews. This does not help bridge the Jews and the Christians at all when you have an emperor talking like this. He continues, we have received from the Savior another way. A course is open to our most holy religion that is both lawful and proper. Let us with one accord take up this course, right honorable brothers, and so tear ourselves away from that disgusting complicity, for it is surely quite grotesque for them, the Jews, to be able to boast that we would be incapable, we Christians would be incapable of keeping these observances without their instructions. So you can see he doesn't like the idea that Christians have to wait on the Jews to make these decisions for them. What could those people, the Jews, calculate correctly when after that murder of the Lord, after that parricide, they have taken, parricide is when you kill someone of your own family, a father, mother, brother, sister, and Jesus being a Jew, so that's where the parasite comes in. They have taken leave of their senses and are moved not by any rational principle, but by uncontrolled impulse, wherever their internal frenzy may lead them. Hence it comes about that in this very matter they do not see the truth, so that nearly always they get it wrong. Why then do we follow those Jews who are by common consent sick with fearful error? We would never participate in the practices of thoroughly evil persons. Therefore it was proper that the matter should be adjusted in such a way that nothing be held in common with that nation of parricides and Lord killers. All right, so we have now gone from the realm of theology. You know, we can talk, not we, but you can make these declarations within the theological realm upon the state of the Jewish people. But now we've got the emperor of the Roman Empire, the entire Mediterranean region, making decisions and speaking of the Jews as dogs, as a mob, as being always in error. We now have ratcheted up the rhetoric. And this is when it becomes very dangerous, when you have an emperor who's basically advocating or supporting this type of attitude against the Jewish people. Has anyone been to Arlington Cemetery? There's a cemetery, okay. Have you ever been to the amphitheater? There's an amphitheater at the cemetery. No. Well, if you ever go up there next to the amphitheater, there's a cross. And what's fascinating about this cross, I think this is a video, is watch what happens to this cross as you go around at 360 degrees. It just looks like a normal cross. It's about 24 feet high. It's made of marble. But when you get to the other side, something fascinating you discover on the other side of the cross. You find a bronze sword. This is it in its bigger picture. But you can thank Constantine the Great for merging the sword of the state with a religious symbol. You can thank Constantine for that. Next week, I've got a video that will explain a little bit more about this. But this is when you're beginning to see Christianity weaponized. You know, it's one thing to have words and say evil words toward people. It's another thing then to use a sword in conjunction with those evil words. When you leave the 4th century, you now have a much different Christianity than you did at the beginning of the 4th century. You now have an emperor. Now he dies, but he passes his faith on to his son, and then to their sons and sons and sons. By the year 381, Christianity has now been declared the de facto official religion of the Roman Empire. In Constantine's day, it was just Christianity was favored, but paganism was allowed. But by the end of the century, everything had been made illegal except for Christianity. And what's even sadder is it's a certain type of Christianity. If you didn't walk a line according to the decrees of the bishops, and the emperor will bring his sword into the equation and make sure that you believe exactly this way. And if you don't, your church will be confiscated, you'll be banished, and your property taken, and perhaps even your life taken. All because we now have the political mixed in with the religious. And you saw that video where the emperor was handing his helmet or his crown to the Pope. And you now have a mixture of church and state, and that's deadly for the Jewish people. It's very deadly. And then you multiply that for centuries after centuries after centuries. You include the art that we covered for several weeks. You get it to the point of Martin Luther. You add his writings. No surprise by the time you get to the 20th century that you have this hatred toward the Jewish people, which ends up leading to the Holocaust. So I hope next week to end this discussion on anti-Semitism. We'll see how well it goes. But anyway, thanks for your attention.